if you're ready to stand on the line, if you're ready to fight back and serve it to the criminals trying to enslave you and steal your wealth through monetary creation and exorbitant taxation, you're in the right place. Welcome back to another edition of the Prepper Recon Podcast. I've personally been buying gold and silver from JM Bullion for over 2 years. They offer the best prices over spot that I can find, and I've never had a problem with an order. If you're looking to trade in some of your fiat paper for real money, check out jmbullion.com today. Our individual first aid kits are now on sale. They're MOLLE-compatible pouches in Coyote, ACU, OD, or Black. They're equipped with an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, TK4 tourniquet, suture kit, and lots of extras. It's perfect for your car, bug-out bag, or home first aid kit. Go to the PrepperRecon.com homepage and click on the IFAC store tab at the top of the page. They're on sale for $89, and that includes shipping. This kit could save your life. Today, we're happy to have John Rubino on the show with us. John, welcome back.
Mark, great to talk to you again.
Oh, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Now, all the fashion magazines are saying that gold repatriation is the new black for 2015. I think Germany started the trend back in 2012. More recently, we've seen the Netherlands and France have jumped on the bandwagon. Belgium is also said to be planning to bring the gold home. Do they know something that we don't know?
Oh, we know what it is. No, they are getting more and more worried about where the world is headed. You know, if you're in Europe, you can't help but be worried, right? And there's so much going on that's threatening to you because the Eurozone could easily spin out of control here. Now, we've got the Greek elections coming up this month that could be the catalyst. You know, Greece elects somebody that is anti-Euro, and they choose not to participate in the common currency again, go back to the drachma. Then all the big banks that have loaned money to Greece have drachma loans instead of euro loans. And anyhow, it leads to the fragmentation of the Eurozone. So that alone is enough to make the European countries extremely nervous. And then the U.S. we're looking more and more untrustworthy all the time. So if we're storing your gold, and you're worried that you might need that gold in the near future because you might have to go back to your old currency and you want to be able to back it with something tangible, then it makes complete sense to bring your gold home, store it yourself. So there's really no more to it than that. The world is getting more and more stressful. No matter where you are, it's easy to look out and see things that are threatening to you. And gold is the ultimate anti-stress asset. You know, if you've got gold on hand, then your financial worries are minimized because you got something that's going to hold its value over long periods of time, whereas virtually nothing else has, other than maybe good quality farmland and more recently energy assets. Although even, we're seeing lately that in the short run, even energy is not a long-term or a intermediate-term store of value. So it makes sense for these guys to bring their gold back. And to the extent that that increases demand for gold and decreases the amount of gold that the U.S. government has to play games with in the gold market, it's a good thing for gold bugs because we want gold in strong hands. In other words, people who aren't going to just dump it on the market or use it to back paper games in the futures contract market. To push the price of gold down. So the fewer people that are able to do that, over time, the more rational the gold market will become, and the more it'll trend towards its intrinsic value, which is a heck of a lot higher than the current price.
And the last time the French wanted their gold back, it created quite a conundrum for the dollar, didn't it?
It did, didn't it? That was the end of Bretton Woods. Which was the agreement that the world set up after World War II, through which the dollar was linked to gold, and the rest of the world's currencies were linked to the dollar. So we in the U.S. had responsibility for managing our currency prudently. because the dollar was really the reserve asset for the rest of the world. But we didn't do it. We started the Great Society social programs and the Vietnam War at the same time, and we're spending huge amounts of money, and it scared the rest of the world. So they started asking for gold in return for dollars, which at the national level they had the right to do. France was enabled under Bretton Woods to give us dollars and demand gold in return. Well, our gold started to disappear as that happened because too many people were demanding it. So the U.S. shut the gold window in 1971, and henceforth, the rest of the global financial system, or the entire global financial system, was pure fiat currency. In other words, every currency in every country was worth only what the government said it was worth. It wasn't backed by anything tangible. You couldn't exchange it officially for anything tangible. And so ever since, we've been on a fiat currency standard, which human nature says would lead to lots of debt and currency printing and inflation, because you've put basically unlimited printing presses in the hands of government bureaucrats and politicians. And so we got exactly what you'd expect. We have a world that's grossly over indebted now. We owe so much money at every level of every society that there's no way we pay it back. And the world's central banks are just churning money out. They're just shoveling it out the door in order to pay all these debts that otherwise would be unpayable. And so it is interesting that we've come full circle. Now France wants its gold back again. So it would be poetic justice and very symmetrical if that's what set off the next currency crisis and led to the repudiation and the discrediting of the concept of fiat currency. Maybe we'll come around to realizing that giving governments unlimited printing presses is a bad idea, because it activates the worst sides of human nature. We're potentially good creatures, but inherently corruptible. And unlimited printing presses in the hands of governments and easy money in general corrupt human beings more completely than almost anything else.
Now, while we're on the topic of the French, last year we discussed the long-term health of Total CEO Christophe de Margerie, as he was questioning the need to keep trading oil exclusively in dollars. I don't believe I've heard anything else from him. How's he doing?
I heard he's not doing so well.
Something about a snowplow hitting his plane in Russia. I guess that kind of stuff happens, though, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it happens all the time. There's nothing more to see here, folks. Anyhow, that stuff does seem to be happening to bankers out there lately, and
like 40,
occasionally,
something like 40 of them committed suicide last year.
Yeah, and I have no idea what to read into that. It's just a kind of an interesting thing to be happening at a time when we've got all these other financial stresses out there. When you've got bankers dropping dead all over the place, and there are reporters who are meeting untimely death out there, and this oil company executive. So it's not just bankers. It's a lot of weird stuff going on, and it could just be one of those things that when you look for it, you find it at any given time. And if you're not looking for it, you don't see it, so you don't notice it. But it does seem like there are some really strange undercurrents right now, and that they seem on the surface to tie into the fact that we're heading into another global financial crisis. We've borrowed insane amounts of money. The governments of the world are desperately flailing around trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. And in a lot of cases, they're failing. So about all you could have said 10 years ago about today's world is that it would be kind of crazy. Wild things would be happening because of all this debt and all this currency being created. And, that's basically true. Crazy things are happening. And there's no real way to know what the details of the crazy stuff are going to be, except that it's the kind of thing that you'll look at and go, wow, did that actually happen? And we'll see more and more of this over time, just because, the basic theme of the dollarcollapse.com thesis and most sound money analysis out there is that if you borrow too much money, your life spins out of control, whether you're an individual or a family or a country. and the countries of the world, along with the individuals and the families and the corporations, have all been borrowing too much money. So everybody's life is spinning out of control right now. And there's no reason to think that it's going to get any better in the short run because we're still borrowing too much money. So crazy stuff is going to happen. It's going to be things that you don't necessarily expect just because there's so much that can happen. And that's the way life works. You know, the thing you expect to happen is not the one. Something else comes up to surprise you. And so that's what we should expect going forward, to be surprised.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Cady Armor offers affordable body armor, including level 3 trauma plates made of AR-500 steel. They can endure multiple rounds from pistols and rifles up to 7.62 NATO. Their plates are available with Rhino Linings coatings to reduce SPA. Go to CadyArmor.com, that's C-A-T-I armor.com today.
I'd hate to group DeMargerie in with Saddam and Gaddafi, but they also wanted to get away from trading oil and dollars. So I guess we can they're all in the same place now pretty much, though. Now, speaking of oil, do you think the recent price drop is due to natural market forces, or do you suspect something more sinister?
Well, I think two things are at work here. One is geopolitics. Over the last few years, Vladimir Putin in Russia has been raising his stature around the world dramatically by doing some very bold things and getting away with them. So the consensus a year or two ago around the world was that this Russian guy was not a nice man, not a good man at all, but he was very bold and very creative and willing to take chances and willing to be ruthless. And compared to him, the Western leaders were pygmies. And I'm sure the Western leaders didn't like that at all, you know, and so they've struck back with the main weapon that they have right now, which is financial. You know, they've cut a deal with Saudi Arabia in order to have OPEC continue to produce huge amounts of oil and push the price of oil down, which hurts Russia. They thought hurts Russia much more than it hurts us. And you know, it's worked to an extent. Russia's in turmoil right now, and temporarily at least, Putin is distracted by his internal turmoil, and he can't cause trouble around the world. However, a falling price of oil is bad for us too, as it's turning out. Before I get to that, let's talk about the other reason oil is going down, and that is because the global economy is slowing down. Europe is dropping back into recession. Japan really kind of never left recession, but they're dropping back into deflation and possibly recession right now too. And China had this huge infrastructure build out over the last 10 years. You know, that's basically why the world economy came back a little bit to the extent that it did, was because China was borrowing $15 or so trillion and using it to buy infrastructure, you know, roads and bridges and entire new cities. You know, they built probably more than any other society has ever built in a period of 5 years. And to do that, they had to buy iron ore and copper and oil and lots of other natural resources, which bid the price of those things way up. And now they've kind of hit a wall as far as that infrastructure build out went. You know, they got a lot of bad debt and a lot of looming bond defaults that have scared them. And so their demand for natural resources has gone way down lately, and that includes oil. So you got a slowing global economy. At the same time, you've got the U.S., by the way, ramping up oil production with all that, the you know, exotic things that we're doing with shale oil and tar sands oil and things like that. And so you've got a fundamental imbalance between supply and demand out there, and that's pushing the price of oil down. And this happens periodically in the oil market. You know, in 2008, when the global economy hit that wall and almost collapsed, price of oil went from $140-something a barrel to, I don't remember the exact bottom, but I think it was like $10. It was some insanely low price. And so we're kind of doing that again. So you've got geopolitics and economics both at work on the same side of that market, pushing the price of oil down. So it dropped again today, could drop some more tomorrow. You know, there's a limit to how far down it can go, but I doubt if we're there yet, if the players continue to do what they're doing right now.
And as oil moves, so goes the ruble, or are there other things at play for the Russian ruble?
Well, there are a lot of sanctions being imposed on Russia as part of this whole economic warfare thing, where Europe and the U.S. are closing Russian companies and Russian banks out of the global marketplace in a lot of cases, and that also helps push down the value of the ruble. But in general, it's a petrocurrency. Russia gets most of its income from producing energy and selling it to the rest of the world. So you would think the ruble would go down when oil prices go down, and that's exactly what's happening. The interesting thing, I think, about all this is that the U.S. doesn't seem to have thought this through with respect to the impact of lower oil prices on the domestic economy now, because we have basically this decade's bubble has been in shale oil and in fracking for natural gas, and in other words, exotic kinds of energy that cost a lot to produce, but are viable if oil's $100 a barrel. And so we've had this funding boom over the last 2 or 3 years in the Dakotas and other parts of the U.S., and where people were borrowing huge amounts of money and using it to ramp up shale oil productions. And in a lot of cases, they were issuing junk bonds in order to do this. And those bonds traded very well to begin with. They were above par a year ago. In other words, they were trading above the price at which they were sold. And that implied that everybody expected oil to stay expensive, and these oil producers to generate huge amounts of cash flow, have no trouble paying off their bonds, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's changed now that oil is down by 50% or more. So something like $170 billion of junk bonds have been issued recently in the oil sector. And a big chunk of that is in shale oil, and a big chunk of that is going to go bust in the year ahead if oil prices stay where they are. So we're looking at something very similar mathematically to the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008. And so now the question becomes, will this metastasize? Is it going to spread through the rest of the financial system and cause a systemic crisis? Or is it going to be contained to this one sector and not cause anybody else any trouble? And we'll see. There's no way to know ahead of time about that. But it's definitely another risk, yet another thing that could go wrong that we have to pay attention to.
And I'm sure if we had Mr. Bernanke on the line, I'm sure he'd tell us that it would stay contained to the junk bonds connected to the oil market, like the subprime market. That's what he told us about that it would stay contained to the subprime market. And of course, that was after he admitted that there was even a possibility of a real estate bubble in the first place.
In The Money Bubble, the book that James Turk and I just co-authored, we include a whole section of quotes from Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan, centering around derivatives and the housing bubble and all the rest, where they didn't see it coming at all. They were on record as saying, yeah, derivatives actually decrease risk in the financial sector, and you should take out adjustable rate mortgages because they're so much of a better deal than fixed rate mortgages, the housing bubble, to the extent that there's a bubble at all, it's very localized, and home prices have never gone down nationwide, and so there's no reason to expect them to go down again. There are all these amazing quotes from these guys who are supposed to be the smartest economists in the world. They are where they are. They're the most powerful economist in the world, the second most powerful person in the U.S. economy when they're running the Fed, and they were completely clueless. They sit at the center of all of these data flows. They see the raw data for everything, and they get to talk to all the other smart economists. They didn't see it coming at all. They absolutely didn't understand the process. So why should we trust them about anything else? And yet we still do. We still think Janet Yellen, their successor at the Fed, knows how to fix whatever problem comes up. and someday we'll learn. But I'm afraid it's going to be an incredibly painful lesson, because we've been trusting these guys for such a long time and acting in ways that we wouldn't have acted if we didn't trust them. And so now our excessive borrowing, because we trusted the powers that be, will come back to bite us in the very near future. And a lot of people are going to suffer unnecessarily, and they're going to learn that they shouldn't trust the people in charge, but they're going to learn it too late because by then their mortgage will already have blown up. Their house will be taken away. Their business loans will be lost. They'll be giving back their cars. It's going to be a really, really brutal few years when this finally does blow up.
And then you have to wonder if they're really such buffoons or if there's actually something going on there, because Greenspan just gave a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations last month telling everybody that's in that group that they should be buying gold, which is nothing that you've never heard him say to the mainstream press, but this sort of group of global insiders, it sounds like they're getting a different message from him than what we get.
Isn't that interesting? When he wanted to be renominated at the Fed, he didn't say anything about gold. You're right. He never made a peep. He was all about derivatives back then. And so now that he's out, he's reverted to his old self. He was at one time this really iconic economist who wrote some of the best stuff from a libertarian point of view on gold and its relation to the state and how governments don't like gold because gold limits the power of the government. So to the extent that governments are trying to move gold off the center of the global financial system, it's so they can gain power over individuals. He wrote all that. And then as soon as he got into power, he behaved exactly as one of the people he was criticizing back when he was a free agent. So now that he's a free agent again, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise for him to revert to his old self. But a little bit late to save the people who are going to be just crushed by the next global financial crisis. Because, it's really important to understand that the people who are hurt by these crises are not the people who cause the crises. The big banks last time around, they got very rich playing games in the derivatives market and in other kinds of leveraged financial instruments, and gave themselves huge bonuses every year. And then, they had yachts and they had fast cars and New York City penthouses. And then when the market blew up, when they caused a global financial crisis that almost wiped out literally all of the major economies of the world, they got bailed out by taxpayers. And they went on as before. They paid themselves record bonuses in 2009 after almost blowing up the global economy. And they've never looked back. They've continued to make huge amounts of money. And so it's a fairly safe bet that whatever happens in the next few years, these guys are going to come out of it at least, even if they don't keep their jobs, which they kept their jobs last time, but let's say they get thrown out of work at least this time, they're going to get to keep all the bonuses from prior years. So they're going to retire very rich. And they will, even if they're disgraced, which didn't happen last time, but even if they are this time, they'll just go off to some island or something. They'll sail their yacht around and relax and enjoy themselves, and they won't have to be around anybody who hates them and like they would be if they were here. And so I think they're not worried. And the reason they're not worried is because they believe they control the government and that the government won't let them come to any kind of harm. And so far, they've been right.
Yep. Now back to the ruble. It lost 30% in 2 days right before Christmas, and it's still falling. I think it lost about 3% today. Is that something that could happen to the dollar?
Oh, eventually it's going to happen to all fiat currencies because we're all making the same mistakes. Russia is a special case right now because of all the geopolitical stuff we talked about and because they're dependent on a commodity that has been crushed in price lately. But everybody's making the same mistakes where they're borrowing too much money and they're creating too much new currency to cover their old debts, and it's leading to this huge imbalance between the amount of real stuff in the world and the amount of paper currency. So every major currency is going to go the way of the ruble and then some eventually, and it's just a question of which one goes first. That's what you can't predict, because if you just look at Japan's numbers, they should have gone already. If you just look at Europe, how in the world are they even still together? The euro just doesn't make any sense from a structural point of view, and it's destroying Spain and Portugal and Greece and to an extent Italy and France. These countries can't function under a relatively sound money regime. So why haven't they blown up? They should, and one of these days they will. So all of the major currencies And the dollar, of course. Our numbers are horrendous. We owe vastly more than we can ever hope to pay off. But they'll all go eventually. And the question is, in what order? I think the really interesting story about Russia is what happened with gold. The ruble plunged, but it plunged versus the dollar, and even more so versus gold. So if you owned gold in Russia and you didn't trust your banks and you wanted the core of your finances to be in something that you trusted, and you bought gold coins or whatever and put them in a safe place, you made 60 or 70% in the last couple of months in ruble terms. So gold did exactly what it's supposed to do in a financial crisis. It held its value. And so in the future, when the other currencies start falling like dominoes out there, we'll see gold do the same thing that it did in Russia, where it sits there. It's worth just as much tomorrow as it was last week, even though the local currency is plunging in value. And so in effect, it will go up in local currency terms. So it'll look like it's going up, but what it's really doing is holding its value. You buy just as much stuff with gold next week as the week before. And that's its function. So we'll see at some point gold behave like that. And everybody who owns it will be really glad they did. In Russia, maybe somebody bought gold 3 years ago and has kind of suffered with it in 3 years. It hasn't done as well as a lot of major equity markets and long-term bonds and things like that. But you can bet they're happy right now. They're glad they did it, despite the fact that they had a couple of years in which there was some stress, associated with owning gold because it went down a little bit in local currency terms. But now they're happy. And I think the rest of the world will go through the same process and feel the same way at the other end of all of this.
Oh, yeah. I've gotten lots of letters from our Russian listeners that have been very, very pleased with your recommendation for them to buy gold. I think over a 3-month period, I think it went from somewhere in the vicinity of 45,000 rubles to an ounce to almost 80,000 rubles to the ounce. So that's a really, really big spike in a 3-month period. So I think that just goes to show how fast the price can move when the currency starts failing. Hey, Preppers and Patriots, that was part 1 of my interview with John Rubino. Make sure you come back on Monday to hear part 2 of the same interview. A lot of great information in the rest of the show, so make sure you don't miss it.
Are we living in a time of which there is more prophetic writings than of any period in history? Noah Parker, like many in the United States, has been asleep at the wheel. During his complacency, the founding precepts of America have been slowly, systematically destroyed by a conspiracy that dates back hundreds of years. The signs can no longer be ignored. Watch through the eyes of Noah Parker and his family as a global empire takes shape. Ancient writings are fulfilled, and the last days fall upon the once great United States of America. The Days of Noah, Book 1. Conspiracy by Mark Goodwin is a fast-paced fiction thriller which looks at how modern conspiracies could play into biblical prophecy concerning end times. Buy The Days of Noah in paperback, Kindle, or audio edition at Amazon.com today.